is more than just pleasure. Wake up and live.
Hello and welcome. Today is Monday, October the 26th, 2015. This is Paul Sandhu coming to you with another episode of Wake Up and Live Radio. I have on the line with me today a popular and repeat guest, Dr. Jim Willie, joining me from down in Costa Rica. Jim Willie has been on my program many times, bringing amazing information that is valued much by my listeners and myself. So without further ado, let me welcome Jim. Hello and welcome, Jim, to the program.
Oh, it's good to be on, Desh. Been a while, and everything seems to be moving along in an inevitable path. Lots of different individual climax points that I'm noticing, and what I think is the most amazing about this whole global sequence of events is that we're getting every couple weeks, every 3 or 4 weeks, we get a new site that signals the breakdown and contribution toward the global collapse, which on the other side will have the reset. And the reset is a very nebulous and vague term, but kind of a scary concept. But, now I think the big surprising new point is Turkey. So we'll get to that, but
okay,
it's interesting how there occasionally there's a new site.
So now you're talking about this reset, which of course would involve the U.S. and its position in the world. Okay, so lately, especially with Russia bearing its teeth in Syria, etc., do you think that the U.S. is losing its global leadership, especially with the petrodollar being under massive attack, and the U.S. military seems to be in retreat?
Absolutely. It's unmistakable what's going on. We've got a retreat of many U.S. military elements in the Middle East. And, I don't like getting into a lot of military concepts like this weapon, that weapon, superiority, and tactical issues. I like to focus on the finance and economics, but when the U.S. naval fleet abandoned the Persian Gulf for the first time in 40 years, and it was almost simultaneously, days after the Russians started their airstrikes against ISIS positions, it's pretty hard not to. So I do look at these things. I do comment on these things. I try not to focus too much on the military, but, I've said for a long time that, I've said this for 7 or 8 years. Eventually, you're going to see the U.S. dollar supported by the military. Now you're seeing in precisely, in precisely the area, the central nucleus of the petrodollar home, namely Saudi Arabia, you're seeing the U.S. military bug out. So to me, it's a confirmation that the petrodollar is just about officially dead, because this is precisely the nucleus point where the dollar recycle takes place regarding oil sales. They have names for it. They call it the petro recycle. And the deal was that the Saudis would sell oil in dollars, only dollars, and they would recycle their surplus in U.S. treasuries, and a very small amount in, say, New York City stocks like Prince Alawid. That's very minor compared to $1 trillion in treasury bonds. And the whole Persian Gulf is just loaded with $2.3 trillion worth of sovereign wealth funds. Half of it is owned by the United Arab Emirates. And they're nervous. They're real nervous. They're working avidly, I think, to convert their treasuries into gold. And this comes at a time when the U.S. has been stealing the Saudi gold in the Swiss banks. So there's a lot going on, but yeah, we talk about the U.S. losing leadership. What I hear is that for many important strategic talks, the United States is not even invited. Take a look at the Minsk I and the Minsk II agreements regarding the Kiev and Ukraine war. The United States wasn't even a member of the signatories at the table. So it's pretty hard to say the United States is violating a truce when they weren't even part of the writing and agreement of the truce. This is, very dangerous times. But the U.S. dollar is slipping, and we're seeing so many different elements of what I call the dismantled petrodollar. The consequences are all over the place. You're seeing rising U.S. dollar exchange rate. And, we get the propaganda that the U.S. economy is strong and therefore the dollar is strong. No, that's not it at all. We're stuck in a -4 or -5% recession economically every single year. We're weak, and that's not the effect for lifting the dollar exchange rate. It's liquidation of trillion-dollar derivative contracts. Like there's a huge contract that links the dollar, oil, and the euro. It's being liquidated. It's for $800 billion. And the owners want their money back for the huge contract that they set up. However they set it up, I'm not sure. I do have some ideas, but there are lots and lots of contracts linking crude oil with the major currencies in the IMF basket. So it's artificial demand that lifts the dollar, and as the dollar goes up, the crude oil price goes down. And to be sure, there's economic reduced demand for crude oil. And to be sure, there's increased supply from shale in that whole sector. But the main effect is financial for the dollar going up. It's not economic, and I don't even think it's supply and demand for the oil market. Supply and demand for the oil market is responsible for maybe $15 or $20 in the decline of the oil price. And you got to explain the other 40. The U.S. energy sector is in complete wreckage. It's complete tatters. I mean, I heard reports 4 or 5 months ago that the Rockefeller family has sold 80% of their energy assets.
Really?
So even they're getting out of the energy sector. So that's amazing. Export trade. We got the absolute clowns making statements out of the U.S. Treasury Department, speaking on behalf of the U.S. government, and they say the strong dollar is good for a U.S. economy. No, it's not. You've got something like 200,000 empty containers leaving the Los Angeles area port facilities. This is a gigantic rise of empty containers. So now you can't just say that the United States chief exports are weapons, toxic bonds, and diabetes. You have to add empty containers.
So what you're saying, Jim, is
yes, we're exporting air.
So basically, these containers are coming filled with goods from China, and they used to go back filled with something back towards the east, but now you're saying they're just shipping them back empty because there's nothing to export.
Yes, and I've been looking into, well, what exactly did the U.S. not just China, but the Pacific Rim, Singapore, Taiwan, Korea, that whole area, the
Right.
Pacific Rim. I've been looking into, well, what exactly did the United States export? What was the reverse traffic? And it was scrap plastic, scrap metal, and scrap paper.
Right, yeah.
This is evidence of a third world characteristic. So
they're
anyway,
they're not shipping like minerals and metals or anything like that, just scrap.
Well, to be sure, there was some, but not in the containers.
Right.
In the open barges, the
Yes.
big vessels, they would contain things like coal, cement, lumber, but less so from the United States. The containers Scrap metal, scrap paper, scrap plastic. This is pathetic.
So that means that the trade deficit must be going up then.
Yes, it is. It's up toward like $50 billion a month.
Makes sense.
You know, this is very dangerous for when the United States must produce its own domestic currency for its own usage and nothing more, not an international dollar, a domestic, what I call the Scheisse dollar. Because you've got 50 billion a month in imbalances that must be addressed. How is it usually addressed? With a massive devaluation. That's how.
Right. Okay.
So there's another side to this U.S. military and U.S. leadership fading. And I got to mention it because it's so important. I just don't want to dwell on it much here. The Russians have gone in to the Syria area and are obliterating through airstrikes, and they've promised to increase by a factor of 3 in the last few days. They're hitting the ISIS targets. This is the Islamic State and Islamic State of the Levant, you know, ISIS, ISIL, whatever you want to call it. Islamic State is probably just fine. Islamic Caliphate is another name for it. And there's duplicity here. The U.S. military maintained a long list of targets, but we never attacked them. And the reason is simple, because they are from the United States. They're supported, created, funded, trained, supplied, everything. And we never hit the targets. So the Russians just took the list and slammed the targets. And it's becoming quite clear. The Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov made a statement that the U.S. created the ISIS guerrillas. They created the whole concept. And, you know, I've got kind of the reason why. The reason why is kind of simple. The U.S. was frustrated with the Iraqi parliament because it was 2/3 Shiite. So we got out of town, the U.S. military left, and before you know it, the vacuum was filled with ISIS, which is narcotics-funded guerrilla mercenaries. And this is all becoming very ugly and very plain, and you're seeing some almost laughable new language used in the U.S. press. They're calling them anti-royal, anti-Assad, anti-Damascus troops. It's ISIS. They're trying to remove the word ISIS from the U.S. press. So the U.S. is getting caught being a main supplier and creator of the terror organization.
Just like they did with Al-Qaeda.
Yeah, ISIS is Al-Qaeda.
Okay. Makes sense. So
I don't like to get into that too much because it's not finance, economics, but when you start to see the U.S. retreat in a military sense from the defense of the dollar, then it does become a financial factor in the mix. So we're starting to see not just U.S. military defense of the dollar, we're starting to see the opposite, U.S. moving away. And I haven't gotten into anything about tactical superiority of the Russian military versus the U.S. I'm a loyal U.S. citizen who's very angry about what's been happening in the last 15 years, ever since 2001. Just put it that way. I'd like to see things restored, but we like to beat our chests and say we're the exceptional nation, we're the best in everything, we're the best in technology, we're the best in warfare, we're the best in finance, we're the best in sports, we're the best in movies, we're the best in technology. We're not. We're challenged in almost all of the above. And we're not first in a couple of very important things that were made evident in April of 2014 in the Black Sea, and the people at the Pentagon know exactly what I'm talking about.
That some ship was disabled from what I have read. So
USS Donald Cook.
Donald Cook was cooked with some kind of high-tech energy weaponry, from what I understand.
Well, their targeting systems were disabled.
Right.
The Aegis targeting system, Aegis defense and targeting system, was completely disabled. And there's lots of stories about how the Russians have been able to do that. So I think that's part of the reason that the U.S. got out of the Persian Gulf. And another reason was that the Russians sent some cruise missiles all the way from the Caspian Sea to hit Syrian targets. We're talking 1,500 miles or more away. That took the U.S. completely off guard. So it seems like the Russians are using the Syrian little theater as an opportunity, like a showcase.
Could I add, or my observation for this would be that if the Russians were not confident that they are able to have some sort of superiority over the U.S. military might, I doubt that they would have actually stepped into the Syrian theater.
Exactly, and I think it's a showcase for a few different important pointed features. And one is the small ship base as cruise missile launch point. The U.S. didn't know that the Russians had that. So all of a sudden, the U.S. figured and concluded, uh-oh, our fleet in the Persian Gulf is at risk. We better leave. Now, I think it's more than that. I think they had difficulty in getting refueled.
Well, that's a big story which is not really played out in the media here about the fleet leaving the Persian Gulf. As far as I can remember, in my lifetime, that has never happened. So this must be.
No, it's been over 40 years.
Right.
So
right.
to me, it's like the sentry has left the station, which has been important for fortifying the petrodollar.
So basically, they've given up on the petrodollar. That's what it sounds like to me, and therefore, it's only a matter of time before the Saudis announce that they're going to start accepting payment in other currencies and maybe even in gold, and that'll be the official word that the petrodollar is dead. Would you concur with that?
Yeah, in fact, I'd like to package it in a slightly different way. We've got a race on for which will happen first. That the Saudis accept non-dollar oil payment or the House of Saud falls.
Now, I did see, Jim, this is, we're kind of extending this topic a little bit, but why not? It's important. That I read on Russia Today about these high-level meetings that have taken place between Putin and some of the Saudi, top officials. And they've been down there a few times this year already, so it looks like they have some sort of agreements that are being signed, but they're not really being, mentioned too much in the Western media here. So do you think, and you have always indicated that Saudi is going to lean east, so it seems like that it's being done on paper now, not just, through back channels.
They might not just lean east. They might have a fall of the House of Saud, and the new regime is leaning east.
Okay.
That's how big it is.
Right.
You don't have a 40-year relationship, and all of a sudden they say, we've been dancing with you, Washington, for a long time. We think we'd like to dance with that sexy little Russian.
Mm-hmm.
No, it doesn't work that way.
Right.
What you have is the entire structure falls down, and a new structure takes its place. It's called a divorce.
Yes.
That's what's coming, and we're seeing these meetings. He's even getting a new little acronym, MBS. And when I saw capital M, little b, capital S, I was thinking, wait a minute, mortgage-backed security? No. This is Mohammed bin Salman.
Okay. Yep.
He's the crown prince.
Right.
He's the son of King Salman, who's got dementia and has not been doing his job lately. So, in addition to the fall, no, I shouldn't say in addition. One of the ripe factors for the fall of the House of Saud is the king is senile. And
yes.
He's not reporting to the office. So his son is taking control, and all the son's half-brothers are challenging him. And if you think they're 2 or 3, you're crazy. It's more like 30.
So Saudi Spring is a very real possibility then.
Oh, I think it's already well along. The Saudis are in real deep trouble. I call it a state of flux. I did a family tree on my October report, the Money War report within the Hat-Trick letter. And it's almost funny because the family tree doesn't have enough space to show the branches going outward for all the brothers because there are 29 wives.
Oh yeah, it's impossible to keep track of everybody that's somebody down there. You're right.
On the family tree, Dash,
Right.
I put, I mean, this is taken from an article out of the Middle East, and it was all, very accurate and shows the grandfather and even King Faisal and some of his other brothers. But it gets kind of weird because you see a dozen or so half-brothers who've got important ministry posts or economic advisory posts, things like that. But then it goes to the side and it says 29 others are not shown. So these are all half-brothers
right.
vying for the throne. And some of them have been pissed on for years, excluded from power, excluded from the wealth. And they have payback on their mind. I like to describe it as, you've got some of the king's sons from various women. Some of the women are from important families. Some are from powerful business families. Some of them are from families that have done extreme favors for the royals. Others are not so powerful. They might have just had alluring daughters. So there's no homogeneity among all the women that produced the half-brothers. And it's way more than 30 half-brothers. So there's a huge battle for the palace control. And what I'm hearing is that some of them are very anxious to cut the cord with the West and much prefer establishing better lines with China and Russia.
Okay, let's move on to China then. Seems like there is a Game of Thrones that is going on in Saudi Arabia, and we'll keep our eye on that. Now, we've talked about Russia and its military might and its neighbor is, of course, China, which is the probably the most important player in the economic and even financial realm now. So what is happening? I keep reading in the Western press that China's economy is in trouble. Everything is basically falling apart, and they have done like 6 rate cuts this year. But on the other side, it seems like the renminbi has almost achieved a reserve currency status, and it's international. It's being seeded internationally. Its hubs are renminbi hubs are opening up all around the globe. So, what information do you have for us on the China front?
Okay, I'm going to keep this pretty much financial because there's so much to discuss on the financial side that it's exciting. The changes are exciting and they're very encouraging. To begin with, we must move away from the dollar. It reminds me of my old digital days in the 1980s when the U.S. and much of Europe and Asia was dominated by IBM followed by digital. And we had a saying. We said, we must move away from the VAX. The VAX was a type of computer. The VAX. Move away from the VAX as quickly as possible, but don't run, walk fast. And the United States has not been moving away from the dollar toward the gold standard. We've not been doing anything. We've been defending to the death. And now we're facing the death. But what's happening is a lot of RMB, I call it RMB. It stands for renminbi. It means people's money in the Chinese language. And it's not a second Chinese currency. It is the yuan, and it's called the RMB. It's it's kind of like USD and the RMB. They're battling for each other. But I stick with the financial aspects of it because there's so much to discuss, and I like to stick with finance and economics with the newsletter rather than military and hostility.
Oh, can I interrupt you for 1 second, Jim? I neglected to mention at the beginning, you mentioned in your newsletter that you are the editor of the Hat Trick Letter, which is found on your website, goldenjackass.com. So please forgive me because I neglected to mention that at the beginning of our program, which I should have.
Oh, that's quite all right. Now, let's get to the trading hubs. They're sometimes called RMB centers, RMB trading hubs. And we've got them right now in Frankfurt, Germany, in London, England, in Paris, France, and in Zurich, Switzerland. We have them now. The two biggest are London and Frankfurt. Frankfurt, Germany is their financial center. Frankfurt, Germany is the home of the Euro Central Bank. I'm not sure, but I think the Bundesbank is there also, the German Central Bank. I'm not certain of that.
It's like the New York of Germany.
Yes, it is. And they call it the Main. Their Wall Street is the Main. So, now I'm hearing that recently there's a new one with Prague, Czechoslovakia. Now, these hubs, they're not, they're not regular little, bank centers. They're very expanded bank centers. And let me describe the differences between a trading hub and, say, a yuan swap facility. I think there are 31 nations that have signed up to create a yuan swap facility since 2005 or 6. And I believe, I'm not certain of this, I believe Brazil was the first one. And it became the prototype. And now all kinds of nations. And we're talking about Western nations too, like France and Switzerland and England and Australia and New Zealand. They have yuan swap facilities. Well, first of all, describe a yuan swap facility. We got 3 gigantic Chinese banks, and you have 5 large Brazilian banks, and they settle all their bilateral trade among those 3 Chinese and 5 Brazilian banks without the dollar. So a yuan swap facility is a device, a platform for avoiding the dollar in trade settlement. Well, that's kind of significant, but it's also rather limited in what it can do. Here's what an RMB hub center does. It does that, but it also adds a currency exchange center where businesses, apart from settling trade, they just go out and arrange for, say, converting a whole batch of euros to RMB. Or they've got some payments to make, and they've been accumulating their RMB, and they want to go use it at the trading hub to convert back. Lots of different directions, and it's not for specific payments. It's for handling accumulated currency. Okay. It's an exchange center, a forex window. Okay.
Right.
That's one function of an RMB hub center. Another one is very, very important and kind of overshadows all else, and that is a bond issuance center. And by that I mean the Chinese come to London, for instance, and say, we're going to sell $3 billion of a 10-year note for Chinese government debt. And we're selling it in RMB, and we're doing so in London. That's very, very big and significant. It's going to get a lot weirder because the Italians might say, we're going to sell 10 billion euros worth of debt, but we're going to denominate it in Chinese RMB to attract Chinese investment. And by doing it in RMB for Italian debt, they will enable the investors to avoid a currency risk in the case of fluctuations or a vanishing act of the euro currency. So, an RMB trading center, a hub center, is for bond issuance, and you can get corporations involved in there too. Like IBM might issue a $1 billion RMB note for corporate debt. All right, so you've got the bond issuance, you've got the Forex exchange window, and a whole lot more at these trading hubs. These hubs are huge. It's like a mini Wall Street devoted for the Chinese currency activity. Wow. It's just very, very big. So a lot of these big items are coming, and I agree with you, and I've been saying this for months. The big tipping point is going to come when the Saudis and the Gulf Emirates. When you think of Gulf Emirates, think immediately of the UAE. UAE has gigantic oil deposits, massive oil revenue from production, and not a very big population. So unlike the Saudis, they have a bigger savings account. So when the Saudis and the Gulf Emirates, led by UAE, announce that they will take RMB for oil sales, to me, that's the death sentence for the dollar. It's the complete wreckage, the headache ball, knocking down the petrodollar building and whatever is left of its foundation. That's a game over signal. And it's coming. I think when you're seeing Mohammed bin Salman, MBS, going to the Kremlin, and some of the pictures tell 1,000 words. It's like a sheepish 30-year-old man talking to the warden in Vladimir Putin, and Vladimir Putin is looking like, full confidence, and MBS, the poor crown prince, is thinking, are they going to cut my head off back in Riyadh? Maybe I need a better ally with this guy, the president of Russia. Oh, we got very big events coming. And I think the Persian Gulf, the Gulf Emirate nations, I think they're going to play a very big, important role. It gets extremely complicated when you drag in ISIS, which has a lot of Saudi guerrillas involved. They're coming back home. They're abandoning and deserting their posts in Syria, heading into Jordan, and going to come in through the back door into Saudi Arabia. You got also the war going very badly for the Saudis in Yemen, where all the U.S. ammunition depots and the embassy for the United States was overrun. And now you got 1 million guerrillas from Yemen on the Saudi border, and they're supported by Iran. I mean, you could actually make an argument that the Yemen war is a proxy war of Iran versus Saudi Arabia. So there's a lot going on here.
Who's going to win that one? Yeah, for sure.
The Saudis are not going to win. That's why I'm putting my money, Desh, on the fall of the House of Saud.
I would agree with you. By the way, Jim, did you see that story about the Queen giving the Chinese leader tours of Buckingham Palace and everything? So this idea that London is courting, the Chinese to become a major renminbi hub is certainly true if the Queen's getting involved in it too.
Yeah, I think the Queen is a bit of a figurehead anymore, much less important figurehead than she's ever been before. I think she's being permitted to live out her reign because there's so few years left. All they have to do is deny her some children to sacrifice, disembowel, and drink on the blood, and I think her longevity will be shortened.
No, but I mean even symbolic. But these basically sucking up to the Chinese and just the treatment that they were given, it shows the importance of China to the Western world.
Absolutely. I spoke rather disparagingly, not facetiously. I'm not being humorous when I talk about drinking the blood of children for the Queen. I think she's a Satanist. But they did give royal treatment to the Chinese. It was President Xi and his entourage. He toured a facility in Manchester that had lots and lots of trade deals and technology sharing involved. And they're talking in London about a golden era where they can connect to the Chinese Belt and Road, the Silk Road.
Right.
President Xi likes to call it the Belt and Road because it involves a maritime element, not just the Silk Road. And, I've tried to cover this in the Hetrick letter for October. There are numerous elements to the trip and the visit by President Xi. That's how you pronounce XI. It's like he, she, it, she, President Xi. And it had a lot of different sides, and I think they're sucking up to the Chinese. And a very important point is they want the London RMB hub center to be significant. They want it to be as big or bigger than the Frankfurt, Germany one. And I've been saying this for close to a year. About a year. It was last autumn months of 2014 that the Frankfurt hub became much more of a news item and a prospect for expansion and growth. I think we're going to see a competition between Germany and London courting the RMB trade, courting the financial center business. What I mean is Germany and England are going to compete for the Chinese government bond issuance and the other sovereign bond issuance in RMB, like for Italy or even France. We're going to see competition for this. We're going to see the Swiss come out and say, oh, wait a minute, we're a bigger financial center than Frankfurt. Bring your business to us. We're more experienced. We can handle it. And what you're going to see is good old-fashioned competition driving some of the fees down. The competition will bring down some of the costs of transactions. So this is all very good. But whenever you see new stations for RMB trade and activity, just think of it as, well, these are not dollar. This is going to really help the non-dollar trade and really harm the dollar primacy.
So now as the dollar becoming the reserve currency really helped the United States, become a financial and military powerhouse, would that also not apply to the Chinese then when all these bond issuances in all across the world start taking place in renminbi as they have been in dollars, etc.? So this actually bodes well for the Chinese economy in contrast to what I keep reading about in the Western press, that it's all slowing down and they're in big trouble.
Yeah, the Western press likes to point out the low percentage of trade transactions, trade payments that are done in RMB, and the low percentage of RMB bonds that are sitting in global banking systems. And it's almost ironic. It's a little laughable. What they're saying is there's not enough Chinese RMB bonds out there in order to become a big player. In other words, they don't have enough debt.
But that problem is being resolved even as we speak, right? It's only a matter of time before there's enough of these bonds out there.
I don't know. The Chinese aren't sufficiently bankrupt is the message I hear. The Chinese don't have enough RMB bond volume out there to fill out the World Bank systems, whereas the U.S. is sufficiently bankrupt to have gigantic multi-trillion-dollar volume to fill up the banking systems. In other words, we equate brokenness and indebtedness with strength financially. We call debt an asset.
Yes.
That is the error. And it's like the huge anchor that's going to crash through the platforms and sink the USS Dollar, the ship. We do have these avenues set up. I think before long, it could even be next month, the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, is going to announce that the RMB is going to be included. And then there are a couple of bank analysts out there. One of them was from Standard Chartered. And he actually said, look for about $1 trillion worth of Chinese RMB bonds to enter the Western banking system in the following months after the IMF gives the permission to include it. It won't just be the dollar, euro, pound, and yen. Add in the Chinese RMB, and you can't have all these banks add new RMB bonds without getting rid of other bonds to make room for the Chinese bonds. In other words, you're going to see some diversification out of the dollar. The dollar's a major piece.
Yeah, the dollar is the biggest component, so it makes sense that most of the departure will be in the form of dollar, not say the yen or the euro.
Yes.
All right, all right. Well, again, these things you've been speaking about for a while, Jim, and they are happening now. So my hat off to you, Mr. Hat-Trick Letter, and let's talk now about what it means for the U.S. And its the dollar and its position and role in the world. Now, you covered this in our last program, something to the effect about that the U.S. Treasury bond, this whole facade is cracking and, crumbling. Can you please elaborate that, and has much happened in that area since the last time we spoke?
Well, last time we spoke, I talked about the failures to deliver of Treasury bonds that were about $40 billion a day. And do some simple math, and you come up with about $1 trillion a month in hidden QE from failures to deliver using the reverse repo window. I was guessing, just based on what's missing here. You've got failures to deliver of about $1 trillion per month. Where's the other side to that? And I concluded with a good deal of confidence that the other side of that was the reverse repo window, with the Fed shoving money into the Wall Street banks under the cover of failures to deliver. In other words, the Wall Street banks were naked shorting U.S. Treasury bonds, which means they were selling bonds that they did not own,
right,
in order to get $1 trillion a month. Okay. Now what we're seeing was confirmation of my, I love the word conjecture. Conjecture makes guessing sound so much more scientific. But I was putting forth the hypothesis that they were using the reverse repo window to conceal $1 trillion a month in slush money, hidden quantitative easing, hidden QE, so that the public wouldn't say, wait a minute, you're printing $1 trillion a month? I thought you said it was only 40 billion. No, it's 20 to 30 times what they publicly admit to. QE is over $1 trillion a month. This is major African Zimbabwe-style monetary policy. All right, here comes the confirmation. The Fed, U.S. Federal Reserve, they've got a tracking. I don't know what exactly to call it. They follow a certain series, and they track the reverse repo volume. And it's suddenly up $2 trillion in the last couple of months. There's your confirmation. And then we've got a chart. It's straight from the Federal Reserve. This is not a poppycock source. They're admitting to their $1 trillion a month volume in hidden QE. Okay, it's on the Federal Reserve websites. I show it in the Hat-Trick Letter with some graphs. Hats off to Mike Maloney. He's an intrepid analyst out there. He's been on the same thing that I've been on. Okay, I'm not alone here. Sometimes I feel like a lone voice in the wind, but I'm not. There's several other guys out there who are on top of this situation. So we're getting to the point now where it's becoming very obvious that the U.S. dollar is being supported by trillion-dollar per month illicit support. It just can't stand. You've got numerous countries dumping treasuries now. Just for instance, China, 100 billion in July, 100 billion in August, 50 billion in September. These are round numbers. 250 billion in 3 months, and wouldn't you expect the 10-year yield to zoom up toward 4 and 5%? No, it's stuck at a very managed 2%. It's in a range between 1.9 and 2.2% right now. And I think it's going to challenge the 2.0 and go down because the Fed did their second taper talk bullshit exercise in the last couple months and pretty well let it be known that there's not going to be a rate hike. And they did the same kind of bluff in the summer of 2013. I called it a bunch of rat shit bullshit propaganda. And it was one of the easiest calls I've ever made. You know, I got 20 or 30 emails in late September saying, nice call, Jim, that the Fed would not do a rate hike. And I thought, what kind of an idiot would expect a rate hike? We're way past the logical requirement to do a rate hike in order to get back to normalcy. We're not going back to normalcy. We're going to debt default.
So this default is it not already happening stealthily anyhow?
I think the cracks in the bond market are precisely the default.
Right.
You can't have a widespread negative interest rate. I think 20 or 22 countries have a negative interest rate. I mean, that's absurd.
It is absurd.
You can't have a negative repo rate for repurchase of like overnight and very short-term collateralized debt. You can't have that. It won't stand. You can't have negative dollar swap rates for big bank transactions of dollars and very short-term requirements. You can't do that. It won't stand. You can't have $1 trillion a month hidden QE to support both dumping of treasuries by foreign countries and coverage of the Wall Street oil hedges. Because the oil hedges were put on a year ago when the oil price was around 100 and now we're around 50, just for round argument here, from 100 to 50. So the Wall Street banks absorbed all that risk. So they've got $1 trillion losses all over the place.
That was even reported on Bloomberg. They were talking about it, like how these defaults are starting, and that's the word they use, that they're starting, and they expect more to come.
Yeah, they try to make it sound like it's the marginal oil sector,
right?
Shale, and that's only one piece of it. You've got the major oil companies that are also involved. They're hedging. They have hedged their major projects. I mean, companies like Exxon on a basis would put hedges on for, say, 80% of their output for major projects. And this is a standard underwriting function for the Wall Street banks. And it's resulting in $1 trillion losses because it's just not this profitable game anymore that's based on equilibrium of an equal number of people on the other side of the trade. There's not an equal number of people on the other side of the trade. This is a one-sided trade. The oil price is down, and it's staying down. And it's going to stay down for a longer period of time, like forever, because the Iranians are making sure that we're not going to see a rise in the oil price. The Iranians are going to bring on, in a matter of weeks, 500,000 barrels a day. And that's going to guarantee that the oil price does not rebound. And after another couple more months, the Iranians are going to bring on another 500,000 barrels a day, total of 1 million barrels a day. And that's going to guarantee that you don't have a recovery in the oil price. So these are major events, Dash, that are changing the balance. And we're just not going to get back to a normal situation. We're going to have tremendous disruptions to the status quo. And to me, it's a guarantee that we're not going to see some of the major players remain intact, like Saudi Arabia. UAE, to me, is a more interesting nexus point because they're funding ISIS, and they don't have a whole lot of internal trouble back home. They don't have, rising Shia population. They don't have enormous federal debt. They don't have a huge poor population like Saudi does. They're very different from Saudi. They have the wealth and the oil of Saudi,
Right.
but they don't have the problems.
Right.
So I think the UAE is going to do a real power flip.
Mm-hmm.
They were also, I can't think of that, Nayed, I think his name was Nayed or Nayez, King Sheikh Nayez was also on the mission with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. Mohammed bin Salman was joined by Sheikh Nayez at the Kremlin, representing the UAE. He's from Abu Dhabi, not Dubai. Those are the two big city-states within the United Arab Emirates. United Arab Emirates is kind of like modern-day Arab Greece with city-states.
Right.
Okay, so the UAE #1 royal went to the Kremlin at the same time as the Saudi Crown Prince did. What they're doing is they're setting up two big things: oil sales in RMB and the Russians participating in oil pricing.
Right.
This is the practical side of dismantling the petrodollar.
Yes, that would make sense that the Russians would definitely want a hand in the pricing of oil.
And what it means is that the Russians are going to create the military alliance in the Gulf region that displaces the U.S. military presence. So when you saw the naval fleet exit,
right,
think of it as a vacuum soon to be filled by the Russian military
So
and the
those-
Chinese military. I think both.
So then you do not expect the Russian military to leave after their mission in Syria is finished.
No, they're going to be fortifying their Syrian naval port called Tartus, which brings up the whole topic of Turkey. The Russians have been bringing in supplies to Tartus for the last 2 years, and not one inspection of a Russian naval vessel has taken place by the Turkish government in those 2 years of Russian cargo. Okay, that's very important. We have an election. I'm not exactly sure. I think it's November 2nd, a Turkish presidential election. I think we're going to see Turkey do a sudden turn. You could call it a flip east, but watch as it happens, because what I'm hearing from my best source, and my best source on this is Euroraj, and he comes from the Turkey, India, Iran region. That's his expertise. He's got family there.
Right.
He's got a mother in there. He's got a mother-in-law in there, but he's living in the West. Used to work in London and now not London. But anyway, he came up with a conclusion to me that made a lot of sense. He said if Erdogan wins the Turkish presidential elections in 2 weeks, he's probably going to flip east in order to keep peace and call it the new mandate, in order to form a coalition that has some kind of staying power in the Turkish parliament. And if he doesn't win, his opponent's going to flip even faster east. So we've got the existing power player in Erdogan, who's a bit of a U.S. puppet. Notice that a few months ago, he rescinded the Turk Stream pipeline with Gazprom.
That's right, he did, yes.
Whereas a year ago, he was eagerly signing up and licking his chops for all the money that Turkey was going to be bringing in from the gas pipeline trade and the jobs for the construction. This is multiple-sided. But he backed off on all that from pressure from the United States government, which doesn't believe in commerce and trade and construction. They believe instead in war, destruction, wrecking power plants, destroying marketplaces, destroying schools, destroying warehouses. Just in the last few days, the United States announced they were taking hits, ordering airstrikes against ISIS strongholds, when instead it was the Aleppo electric generating station
that got hit.
So the U.S. knocked out electricity for the city, claiming they're going after an ISIS stronghold.
What about all the bombings in Turkey? Like, what message is being sent there?
Well, that's an internal issue where it looks like the people who are not happy with the U.S.-Turkish relationship are letting their voice be heard. This tells me that civilian bombing incident, to me, told a very powerful story that Erdogan is going to flip east or he'll be removed, and the flip east will be even faster. That's what the internal violence means to me.
Okay, that makes sense. So then these political alliances, along with all that's going on in the financial realm, are also happening all at the same time. So there is, you could say, a new world order that is being shaped right in front of our eyes, but not exactly in the way that people have been talking about it in the past.
I think we're seeing a new Silk World order coming into view.
How does Germany fit into this now? Well, we haven't talked about Germany. Wouldn't they need to play a major role in this too?
Yeah, unfortunately, they're playing a U.S. puppet role and causing a lot of problems within Germany. There's a rather significant impact from the lost Russian business. I've mentioned before a few times that there are 3,000 to 5,000 German businesses inside Russia with, actual presence from contracts and delivery and things like that. I noticed something really important. Two big events, one symbolic and one more nuts and bolts. There's a German author, and it's a woman, and she has an expertise regarding more Eastern German issues. And let me see if I can come up with it. I can't think of her name. There's a symbolic and there's an actual writer. Okay, her name is Gabriele Krohn-Schmalz. Gabriele Krohn-Schmalz is a German broadcast journalist and author with an academic background in Eastern European history and political science. She's the author of several books on Russia and currently works as a freelance journalist. She's highly recognized and renowned intellectual and a public figure. The scene was a recent launch in Hanover, Germany, of her book entitled Understanding Russia, the Battle for the Ukraine and Arrogance of the West. Okay, this Krohn-Schmalz woman is acting kind of like a lightning rod for opposition of the current U.S.-led policy shoved down the German political throats. she's a lightning rod for opposition of things like editing out in the journalism of Germany anything that says something positive about Russia and negative about Washington. So we have extreme censorship in Germany right now, and a lot of opposition to it growing right now. Okay, that's the actual lightning rod issue going on. When you have a major, it's like kind of like John Kenneth Galbraith coming out, or James Grant coming out and saying, we don't like all this propaganda that's negative about China or whatever.
Right.
Major intellectual, journalists, and literary, financial, political figures are now stepping forward in Germany saying, this is enough. We're hurting the German state by following the American path. The Russian sanctions aren't doing us any good. The Russian sanctions are up for renewal in a matter of a couple months. And I think you're going to see some splintering of nations. All right, so I mentioned two signals. That's the real one, the tangible one. But there's another one. And it's the appearance of gallows made of wood. You know, I'm not talking about 5 stories big. I'm talking about something in front of what I believe is the German parliament. And I could be wrong about that, but it's in front of an official German government building.
Right.
And what I say is the Germans are growing very angry, feeling betrayed by their leaders. The evidence is in vitriolic debate, and not so much in cartoon editorials, but in actual gallows put in front of the government buildings with the name of Gabriel and Merkel. Gabriel is like the vice chancellor,
right,
behind Merkel, and Merkel is their, sort of president, the chancellor. Sigmar Gabriel and Angela Merkel have signs with a noose around them in gallows in front of the German parliament.
And I guess they're not winning any fans over with all this Syrian, not necessarily Syrian, but these refugees that they are so-called refugees that are pouring into Germany. The German people are quite upset about that as well.
Oh, I know. They're trashing Munich. But what I regard really important right now is that the finance minister Schäuble of Germany is making open statements that they are fully behind the Russian initiatives to clean out the terrorist element in Syria, and that the United States is no longer credible in their approach. So the United States has been saying hands off to attacks on these ISIS locations, and we're being identified as the landlords of terror, the warlords. The other indication is coming from the former Luxembourg head named Juncker, Jean-Claude Juncker. He's making other statements that the Americans have been involved for 2 years in Syria and have made no progress at all except to destroy the infrastructure of Syria. Okay, so the battle plan of the United States is becoming revealed. Blow up the electricity centers, blow up the marketplace, blow up the warehouses, destroy the infrastructure, and claim that they're fighting ISIS.
Right.
Our duplicity is being put forth on stage, and Schäuble, the finance minister of Germany, and Juncker, who I'm not sure, I think he's an EU commissioner, or else he used to be, but he's a very influential figure. He's kind of like...
Yeah, I think he was the EU president or in Brussels or something. Yeah, Jean-Claude Juncker.
Yeah, I regard him as kind of the Kissinger of the EU.
Right.
But these figures are starting to turn against the United States in favor of... I mean, there's a photo op where Schäuble was seen with the foreign minister Lavrov,
right,
of Russia, saying we're going to back the Russian military initiatives to clean out ISIS. This is very anti-Washington.
And Trudeau has also said that he's going to withdraw Canadian support in Syria as well.
Oh yeah, gosh, that was such a slap in Obama's face. Obama called the young Trudeau to congratulate him, and instead of having something really nice told to Obama, he told him that they're withdrawing all the Canadian fighter aircraft support in Syria. Unbelievable. So the United States is very isolated and what I call unmasked for its support of the terrorist element. One of the biggest exports from the United States is terrorism. Diabetes, toxic bonds, war material, and laced vaccines. This cannot continue, Dash.
Well, people inside the country, inside the United States, they may be oblivious to these things because, it's time for the World Series and NFL and all that. But people outside the world who are impacted by these exports that you are mentioning, they certainly are aware of it and they're fed up with it.
Yeah, and now some of the most important figures of Europe are fed up with it, and they're realizing if we continue to side with the United States in this terror element and movement, we're going to suffer in the future for it. So we have a number of tables being turned on the geopolitical side, and this is extremely important and very new. So anyway, let's try to wrap this up. I've got something that I need to do, but
all right, that's good. That's good. So that's enough information to chew on till the next time. And major moves are happening, and this is something that you did say at the beginning of the year that this will be somewhat of a watershed year, and I must say that it has been, not just in the financial realm but also in the geopolitical realm, that these sides are being taken, lines are being drawn, alliances are changing. So the world is in a very big state of flux at this moment, and where it will all settle and how the future will shape up, we can conjecture, like you said, but we'll have to wait and see. But I think we won't have to wait long till the consequences of all that is going on becomes apparent in the coming year. Even I would say in 2016 probably will be an even more volatile year than 2015. So would you like to make some projections going into the new year?
Not really, except wider understanding that the dollar must be replaced in global trade and global banking. The dollar is going to be recognized as on the way out. I call it the King Dollar reign of terror is coming to an end. And the move by Russia to clean out ISIS is a principal part of that ending of the terror. The war on terrorism by the United States is a war and export of terrorism. So that's all being laid out in the open, and I think by early next year it'll be quite clear that the dollar is on the way out, and the RMB will be kind of a transition tool toward the eventual gold standard. I like to point out 4 pivot points for change. You can call it tilting east, or you can call it disruptions, whatever you want. But Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Germany, and Britain. They're all going to be important stories. They're all going to be very, very pivotal in making it clear that major change is coming, and that the dollar just cannot stand in its current form as the leading pillar for global finance and global trade. I look for the RMB to make gigantic strides in the next few months, more so in banking reserve systems than in trade. But as soon as you see the Gulf Emirates accept RMB for oil, you're going to see a quantum giant leap in trade settlement share for the RMB. And then you're going to have a race on for both the banking reserves and trade settlement. And RMB is going to make giant moves, and the dollar is going to make big, big moves down. So that's what to expect in the next year. Pardon me. It's going to be interesting. It's going to be exciting. And, the risk is there that the leaders in Washington are just not going to permit a peaceful transition, and they're going to do their dead level best to destroy the world economy and the world financial system just because they can't control it. That's the risk.
Yeah, that's a real risk, that also may play into the depopulation agenda and all the other things that are going on simultaneously. So again, but yes, you're right that the dollar has been such a giant that you can't take it down in one shot. So all these little things have been happening behind the scenes. The little toes have been cut off one at a time, and we see that happening for the last couple of years, and on a growing scale. So that's why what you have said today is that all these RMB hubs have sprung up, and these are all in preparation for the time when the dollar will no longer be the reserve currency. It may still continue to be a reserve currency, but it will not be the predominant one as it has been these past 40 or so years.
It's both the reserve systems for banking and the trade payment systems for commerce. Those
right.
two. And they're two sides of the same table. Very important for both. And the dollar is going to be fading on both sides of that table.
It already is. It already is, I would say, yes.
Yeah.
All right, Jim. Well, before you go, please go ahead and share your contact information, your website, and information about your great newsletter, the Hat Trick Letter.
Okay, I'll be very brief. It's www.goldenjackass.com. The Hat Trick Letter has been in force for 11 and a half years now. It's very exciting. We're in climax time now. So it's both exhausting and exciting at the same time. There's a free area to the website. Go to the main web page and you can see a lot of interviews like this and pretty much one public article per month. I didn't do one last month. I was under the weather, getting over a flu, but I got over it, finished my work, and everything's back to normal again. But I hope people, after a little bit of browsing, can sign up for the Hat Trick newsletter. Some of the nicest compliments I get are, I was a subscriber and a client for a couple of years, way back in 2009, 2012, and I came back and I really missed it. I like hearing that. And I also like hearing that, I was a follower of your work and did a lot of browsing around and listened to the free interviews and read your public articles, and I just figured I wouldn't sign up for the newsletter, but finally I did, and I'm realizing, oh gosh, I should have done this a long time ago. I love hearing stuff like that, so I hope people can go to the goldenjackass.com website and take a look around and sign up for the newsletter. I don't think you'll be disappointed. So it's a pleasure being on again, Desh, and we always have a good discussion. We sometimes have a lot of fun. So it was a pleasure being on, and I thank you for having me, and good luck to all for a turbulent next few months.
Likewise, Jim, thank you for coming on. Thank you for taking the time to talk to me and my listeners. And it's always a pleasure to have you on as a guest. Your information is, second to none, and I really do value it, as do all the listeners. So, my friend, you have a great day down there, and we'll be talking to you in the very near future, I'm sure.
Okay, excellent. Thanks for having me on. Bye now.
Bye.
When and the pressures of the world coming from all sides. What is it that you do? Do you run and hide? Do you run and hide? When everything's been going wrong and nothing turns out right, do you feel you're all alone? Do you run off into the night? Do you run off into the night? Jesus wants to help you. He wants you to feel secure for any of your problems. Jesus is the cure. Jesus is the cure. Jesus is the cure.